Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. We are officially into the second half of our term. I will be having your review assignments graded and handed back to you soon, and you can always email me and let me know if you have any questions on those. And this week, we're going to start talking about genres. And I kind of outlined the route that this class is going to be taking in our lecture last week. We've already talked about pre-reading techniques and critical reading techniques. Now we're going to spend a few weeks talking about the different sort of genres of literature there are. And finally, in a few weeks from now, we'll wrap things up by talking about synthesizing ideas, which we'll get into in detail then. So thinking about genre. Genre, if you don't know, is basically a category. In a category in literature or in music or basically any of the other arts. You can think of the sort of genres of movies that there are. There's westerns, there's comedies, there's horror movies or thriller movies. And those basic genres can exist in literature as well, although there are other kind of nonfiction categories in literature. But we'll be going through each of those one by one in the upcoming weeks. Now, each genre requires a different approach from you as the reader. If you're opening up a book for the first time and you're starting to read it, you want to know what the genre is because you have to know what your expectations for the book should be. So, a most obvious example, one that probably even seems kind of silly. If you pick up a science fiction or a fantasy novel, maybe The Lord of the Rings or something, you should know what genre it is because you shouldn't really be wanting to get anything out of it other than entertainment or maybe to derive a moral or a life lesson from it. You're going to be looking for very different things if you pick up a history book about something that happened in the past. So the author's reporting on true events and it has to be factual, it has to be accurate. And you're going to be more critical of that author's approach to the facts than you would be of maybe a work of fiction, not The Lord of the Rings necessarily, but if you're reading a fictional work, you're not going to really be looking for whether or not the author got all the details of a certain place or a certain time period just right. You're in there because you're wanting to enjoy the story. A history book, it's different because you want to be able to trust the author at their word, and so having those details takes on a greater significance. So knowing what genre the book is that you're approaching is useful, and it's kind of tying back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago in terms of knowing whether or not you're reading satire or something serious. Just having the author's intention in mind so that there's not a miscommunication between you and the author. So you don't read the book hoping to get something out of it that the author really didn't intend for anybody to get out of it. It was just sort of a case of mistaking the author's intention. So for this week, we're going to start out talking about scientific literature. Our 50 Essays anthology does a good job of having examples of essays from each of these different genres. And I figured we'd start with scientific literature, not because it has any more importance than the other types of literature, but just because we've got to start somewhere, so it might as well be there. If you're approaching a work of scientific literature, that it's a genre that primarily poses a problem or poses a hypothesis and then reports on findings that the author has done to either solve that problem or prove that hypothesis. Maybe you've picked up a scientific report and it seems really dense. Scientific literature is known for expecting its readers to be able to follow along with jargon in a specific field. It's expecting its readers to maybe sometimes know about past reports or past findings because the scientific community knows about all that. And so when it's written to experts in that field, they don't really have to worry about explaining things for like the common man or the layman or whatever term you prefer for that. Now, there is a subsection of scientific literature called popular science. Both of our readings in the 50 Essays anthology for this week would fall into that category. And popular science is geared toward the broader audience. the common audience, not a scientist writing to other scientists in a specialized language. You usually won't find any graphs or any hard raw data in a work of popular science. It's usually, in a lot of ways, sort of distilled information. An author maybe would have researched all of these other scientific works, gotten the sense of what the data and the facts are saying, and then represented it in their own words to make it so that common audiences can understand that without having to know all the specialized language and things. So we can see in the essays for this week that they are both essays of the popular science genre. They're both posing a problem, and they also both present solutions in their own unique ways. So one of the readings, let's start with Our Vanishing Night by, I hope I'm pronouncing this author's name right, I probably am not, Verlin Klinkenborg. It's a very interesting name. Our Vanishing Night is an essay that's telling us about the problem of light pollution. And the author really presents their main idea or their thesis near the end of this essay. They say, for the past century or so, we've been performing an open-ended experiment on ourselves, extending the day, shortening the night, and short-circuiting the human body's sensitive response to light. The consequences of our bright new world are more readily perceptible in less adaptable creatures, living in the peripheral glow of our prosperity. But for humans, too, light pollution may take a biological toll. At least one new study has suggested a direct correlation between higher rates of breast cancer in women and the nighttime brightness of their neighborhoods. So Klinkenborg is talking about this problem of light pollution, and really doesn't just present the problem as something that needs to be solved, but also uses it to draw the reader in through vivid descriptions and good storytelling. Klinkenborg talks about how things used to be before the era of electricity, how the night sky looked back in the 1800s or the 1700s. And the descriptions are really vivid and, again, really pull the reader in. We get, from a few miles away, you would have been as likely to smell London as to see its dim collective glow if you were approaching the city of London from night. And it's something that we don't really think about too much, I don't think, because we've grown up in the era of electricity, and our days are extended. We artificially extend the daylight so we can do things at 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night with perfect illumination because we're indoors or we're standing outside under a street lamp. And maybe it is having some sort of toll on us biologically. And also, Klinkenborg talks about the other species that live around us that are affected by this too, about moths and things like that. And after reading this essay, it really made me start to think, especially that description about you could be approaching London 200 years ago and not really see it because there would be no electricity. You would smell it before you saw it. It really captured my imagination, and it made me look up a video about light pollution. And I'd encourage you to do this too because it's really cool. Just YouTube, light pollution, see what pops up. But there was this one video where it was showing the night sky from different locations in the world, from like a busy city all the way to like Arctic desert, like far in the north. And the night sky, it really just looks unreal in those areas where there's no light pollution. You wouldn't think that you could see the stars as vividly as you can see in those videos. And I think that this is a really good example of an essay that takes a scientific problem, that takes data that's been collected from those sort of hard science readings and makes it so that the person that doesn't know anything about science, me, is interested in the topic. So the popular science genre will often employ fictional techniques to suck the reader into the essay or the book or whatever it is that they're reading. The same thing kind of happens in the other scientific reading for this week. Alan Burdach's The Truth About Invasive Species. So this essay is posing the problem that the accepted idea that we have in the scientific community about invasive species is wrong. So Burdick goes into detail about how the common idea is that non-native species that are introduced into an ecosystem can disrupt or destroy an ecosystem, and the author disagrees with this quite a bit. He talks about past findings and about his own observations, and when he's doing that, he's drawing on he's making an inference about a broader point about human nature. So this essay isn't really just about this problem of misunderstanding invasive species. It's also about human nature. So he's using this one topic, about scientific topic, to make a broader point about how we react to the unknown, about how we react to things that he says here. Nature, it seems, is far more resilient and is run by ecological rules that are far less orderly than expected. Alien species do pose a threat, but the real crime isn't against nature. It's against us and our self-serving ideas of what nature is supposed to be. So he's basically saying throughout this essay that as people, we have this idea that things are supposed to be a certain way, and when something comes in and challenges that, we view that new thing as a threat, or we try to run away from it because we don't like our ideas to be challenged by new ideas or by new ways of being. So it's a really interesting essay because it's kind of doing two things at once. It's not strictly a scientific essay, it's also a reflection on human nature. So that would be the topic of scientific literature. The third essay that I asked you to read for this week was Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And we're not going to talk about it in too much detail this time because I want to dive into it a little bit deeper next time. Although I do hope that you have had a chance to read that, or that you'll get the chance to read that for this week as well. But that's not a scientific essay. It's a philosophy work. It's not really an essay. It's an excerpt from a larger book about philosophy. But I do want to talk a little bit about the philosophy genre now so that you can know what to expect when you're approaching the Allegory of the Cave. Philosophy is a lot like science in that they're both posing a problem of some sorts. But philosophy, as opposed to trying to solve the problem, will oftentimes just make observations about the problems that exist. It's talking about the state of things as they exist in the real world, either about human nature or about the nature of society and community, or sometimes they'll even talk about metaphysical questions. Why are we here? Is there a God? Is there not a God? All sorts of things like that. The Allegory of the Cave is a good example of that because Plato is talking about the way that people behave in a society when they're not really thinking about the greatest good. They're thinking about material gains and sort of immediate pleasure seeking. But he's not, I guess he is kind of in the Allegory of the Cave specifically, but he's not relying on data or charts or any sort of observable means to prove his point that that's how people are. He's just stating it, and the reader has to kind of take that as a given for his arguments to make sense. So for next time, definitely have read the Allegory of the Cave and do the other readings for next week as well. They're all kind of tied together. So yeah, that'll be it for this week. And if you have any questions, you can always get a hold of me and let me know. And I'll see you next time.